Chapter 15 of Wandel the Invader. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Andy Harrington. Wandel the Invader by Ray Cummings. Chapter 15.
This will be the place to land, Greg Haljan.
We were drifting down upon a barren region of naked crags, dark, frowning rock masses, broken and tumbled, as though by some great cataclysm of nature. Mountains upon the moon could not be more desolate of aspect. We landed on the rocks. The heights here had a purple-red sheen from the starlight. We had seen frequent evidence of the storm, and it showed here. Rocks were abnormally piled in drifts. Smooth areas showed, where the pebbles, stones, and boulders had been swept away by the wind. Snap and the girls landed beside us. We spoke softly. None of us, not even Molo, knew how far sound would carry in this air.
"Where is the place from here?" Snap demanded.
"Off there."
Molo spoke with docile, guarded softness. He gestured with his head and shoulder. A quarter of a mile away, over these uplands, the broken land went down in a sharp depression.
"It is there. I think from here we should go on the ground. There is no guard, and I think seldom is anyone on top. If I help you now, if we should wreck the gravity controls, then Wandel will be helpless to navigate space, or to interfere with the rotation of Earth, Mars, and Venus. The allied worlds might then defeat the Wandel ships in battle. If that happened, perhaps your governments, because of my help here, would forgive what my Starstreak has done."
"Your piracy?" I said.
"Yes, I am outlawed. I might be reinstated if you would speak the good words for me."
"Maybe.
Maybe even they would reward me. You think so, Greg Haljan?"
He wanted to be on the winning side. This suited us. "Let's try it and see, Molo. I'll speak plenty of good words for you." Now, as we landed on the uplands, he said,
"You will do best to free my hands."
"Oh, no,"
Snap declared.
"But I am a good fighter. Something unexpected might come."
"Too good a fighter," I said. "We trust you because we have to, Molo, but no more than is necessary." A small recess in the rocks was near us. We put Molo there, with his hands bound, and with Anita and Venza to guard him. Venza held the electronic gun. She knew how to fire it. The girls crouched in a depression about 20 feet away. They could see Molo plainly. If he moved, a flash of the gun would kill him. He knew that. The girls gazed at us as we were ready to start.
"Goodbye, Greg. Goodbye, Snap. Good luck."
"We won't be long.
Sit where you are."
Snap touched Venza's shoulder for his goodbye.
"Listen, Venza. Molo has already told us enough to enable us to find the ship. If he tries anything, kill him."
"Right," she said. We left them. A minute or two, cautiously shoving ourselves along the rocks, and we were crouching there. The cauldron was about 200 feet broad and 50 feet deep, in a regular circular bowl. The starlight gleamed on it, and there were dots of small artificial light. We saw a group of small metal buildings, very low and squat, like balls mashed down, flattened in a bulging disc shape. Between them were tiny skeleton towers. The towers, twice the height of a man, were spread at irregular intervals in a 100-foot circle, with a group of 3 or 4 in the center. There seemed some 20 of them. Taut wires connected their tops, each tower with every other, so that the wires were a lacework above the small disc buildings. The bottoms of the towers were grounded with electrical contacts, and every tower had a ground connection with each other by means of cables. Far to one side, across the bowl from us, was a single globe dwelling with lighted windows. From its ground doorway, a narrow metal catwalk extended like a sidewalk on the ground, winding and branching among the towers and discs. This was the exterior of the Wandel gravity station. It lay silent and dark, save for the starlight and the little lights on the towers. No sign of humans. Then we saw movement in the globe dwelling. A man came to the doorway, gazed at the sky, and went back. I whispered,
"Which is the best entrance to the underground rooms?"
We saw where at several points. The winding catwalk terminated in low dome-like kiosks, giving ingress downward. One was on our slope of the cauldron. "That's the one we'll try," Snap murmured. He stopped suddenly. The top of the distant globe dwelling was glowing. A little round patch there was radiant, like a lighted window. A transparent ray was coming from inside. The operators within this globe were observing the sky, training instruments upon it, no doubt. And now we saw in the sky the third of those sword-like beams. It had probably been visible there for some time, but we had not noticed it. "That's Venus," I murmured. It seemed so. A blurred star, red in this atmosphere, was close above the horizon. The light beam stood out from it, sweeping up to the zenith. The gravity station here was about to make contact with the Venus beam. We heard a muffled siren, a signal echoing from the subterranean control rooms. The current went into all these wires and towers and 20-foot ground discs. The hissing and throbbing hum of it was audible. The discs and towers were glowing, red at first, then violet, then that milky opalescent white. The overhead wire aerials were snapping with a myriad of tiny jumping sparks. I saw now that the top of each tower was a grid of radiant wires, a 6-foot circular projector with a mirror reflector close beneath it and a series of prisms and lenses just above. It all glowed opalescent in a moment, a dazzling glare. Then the tower tops were swinging. The lights from them had reached the intensity of an upflung beam, and the projectors were swinging to focus the beam inward. The focal point seemed about 1,000 feet overhead. All the beams merged there, and guided by the towers directly underneath, a single shaft was standing into the sky. The entire cauldron depression was now a blinding mass of opalescent light. We could see nothing but the milk-white inferno of the glare. It painted the rocks up here on the rim so that we shrank back, shaded our eyes, and gazed into the sky. And from the cauldron, the hum and the hiss of the current, the snapping of sparks, were all lost in a wild electrical screaming turmoil. Overhead, we saw the Wandel beam from Venus. Apparently, this control station had two functions: the control of the planet's movements, its axial rotation and its orbital flight, and its ability to apply gravitational force to other celestial bodies. Wandel was controlling her own movements by applying gravity force, attraction, and repulsion to all the celestial starfield, and doubtless also by applying the repulsive beam tangentially against the ether-like rocket streams. In this respect, I realized, the planet was probably operated not unlike one of our familiar spaceships. In effect, it was itself a gigantic globular vehicle. Later I learned that it was thought that Wandel's atmosphere could be highly electronized at will, with a resulting aberration of the natural light ray reflected from her into space. This could have caused the blurring of the image of Wandel when viewed telescopically from other worlds. Again, for a moment of the contact, there was that bursting light in the sky. The contact with the Venus beam lasted a minute or two. Snap and I, on the cauldron rim, were engulfed in the blaze of reflected light and the wild scream of sound. Then presently the turmoil subsided. The contact in the sky was broken. The tow rope of Venus jerked itself away, but on the next Venus rotation it would be attacked again. Another few minutes passed. The little circular depression beneath us was dim and silent as we had first seen it. Figures were moving within the dwelling structure. From several of the underground entrances figures came up, the 10-foot insect-like shapes of workers. 3 or 4 of the brains came bouncing up, moving along the ground catwalk with little leaps. All the figures entered the distant main dwelling house. The contact was over. "Probably hardly anyone left down below," Snap whispered. "Now's our chance." "If we can get into that opening without being seen," I said. "Shadows down on the rocks to the left. Damnation, Greg, we can make it in one calculated leap." "I'll try it first. I'll get in and wait for you." "Right." We each had a gravity cylinder at our belt and a ray gun in our hand. The slope of the depression was dim here, merely starlit. It was a steep, broken, and fairly shadowed descent, 50 feet to the little dome-like kiosk which marked the nearest subterranean entrance. I went down it with a swoop, landed in a heap beside the kiosk, and ducked into it. Instinct made me fear a guard, but reason told me none would be here. There was only the danger of encountering someone coming up. I was at the top of a winding descending passage, a steep terraced floor. There were occasional lights in the ceiling. In a moment, Snap joined me. "Got here. I wonder how far down it goes." I gripped him. "Snap, no matter what happens, do it with a rush. Keep with me, and if I shout to get out, we go out with a rush. Yes, back to the girls. Use your ray gun and the gravity projector in getting back to them, and get away without me if I fall." "Same for you, Greg." We went down the deserted passage. We had had experience in movement on Wandel now. We handled ourselves more deftly. We went down several 100 feet. The passage branched, but there always seemed a main tunnel. It was all deserted. There were distant, dimly lighted, silent rooms. Were these factories of the strange forms of electronic gravity currents Wandel used? Some were in operation. A hum issued from them. Workers moved about. We stopped to consult. The girls and Paulo himself had described what we would find. A main route leading to the control room, where the delicate mechanisms which operated all this were centralized, the nerve center of Wandel. It seemed that we were following that main route. A worker came with a swimming leap past us. We dropped into a hollowed shadow at a tunnel intersection, and he went swooping by. "Lord, Snap," I muttered. "That was too close for comfort." Again we advanced. The tunnel turned sharply. Down a short slope, a glowing room was disclosed, with 2 or 3 workmen moving within it. The main control room. We could not doubt it. Paulo, in his enthusiasm, had once described it clearly to the girls. Its great skeins of little thread-like wires spread upon the walls, the myriad tiny opalescent discs contacted with the small gray rock surface under the tangled masses of thread wire, the levers and dials banked on the circular tables. They were unmistakable features. "There it is, Snap," I whispered in his ear. "In that central rack. Those insulated rods, see them? Anita told us they used them to adjust the discs. Watch out for the current." "But it's off now, Greg." "There's still danger in it, and you'd short-circuit somewhere. Keep your hands off. Use the rods." "The operators—" He got no further. A figure lunged into us from behind, a giant worker. His largest pincer bit into my shoulder. His hollow shout resounded. The operators of the control room came with leaps at us. There was a moment of wild confusion. Light, seemingly almost weightless bodies flapped against us. Arms gripped us, but they were flimsy. The huge body shells cracked gruesomely as we struck with our solid fists. A moment of turmoil passed. No bolts were fired. The shouts were brief down here in the narrow confines of the tunnel. Panting, bruised more by our collisions against the rocks than by our adversaries, we ceased our wild lunges. We did not look at the scattered, broken, and crushed bodies drifting now to the floor. "Now, Snap, hurry! Others may come!" We lunged into the glowing control room, seized the long insulated poles from the central rack. They had a grateful feel of weight. I picked one up, jumped with a 20-foot leap to the wall. The wires came down like cobwebs under my sweeping blows, the little discs knocked off as though they were fungus growth. Sparks flew around us. Shafts of electronic radiance spat out. The wall was hissing over all its length as I ranged up and down it. The tangled, broken threads of wire writhed like living things on the floor, then crumpled, fused, and turned black. I swept that wall segment with frantic haste, lunged around, and started another way. Across the room I saw Snap doing the same. A turmoil of electrical sound was reverberating around us, deafening, and the glare was blinding. A belt shaft shot from the wreckage under my rod. It seared my left arm. My sleeve burned off. The arm hung limp and tingling at my side. I stopped to rub it. In a moment, strength came back to its muscles. Snap was raging like a great heavy bird gone amok. Through the green fumes of electrical gases which were filling the room, I saw him lunging at the circular tables, overturning them. They cracked like thin, polished stone as they struck the metal floor. I finished with the wall. There was a 20-foot square piece of metal apparatus, ramified and intricate. I heaved it over upon its side. 1,000 little mirrors and prisms dislodged from it came out in a splintering deluge. I was aware of Snap fighting with a brown-shelled figure. Then he was free of it. I saw it mashed and broken at his feet as I dove past, swimming in the smoke to lunge the length of a great fluorescent tube which was still dimly glowing. My pole pried it over. It crashed with a brief puff of light and the rush of an explosion as air went into its vacuum. I found Snap panting beside me, clinging to me in midair. The glare was dying around us. The din was lessening. We were choking in the chemical fumes of the released half-burned gases. Turgid darkness was coming to the wrecked room, with little hissing flares spitting through it. "Enough, Greg. Listen. Up overhead." A great siren from up there was screaming into the night. Snap panted. "Gotta get out of here. Can't breathe." Together we lunged for the tunnel by which we had entered. I stood a moment, gazing back upon the strewn and scattered room. The delicate nerve center of Wandel. Heavy green-black gas fumes swirled in it. Darkness and silence closed down. End of chapter 15.
Chapter 16 of Wandel the Invader. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Marty in Orchid, California. Wandel the Invader by Ray Cummings. Chapter 16. Over us was turmoil. That screaming siren. Then suddenly it was checked, and we heard the thump and swish of what on earth would have been called running footsteps and shouts. Snap shoved me. "Don't stay there, you fool!" We lunged up the passage. Figures barred it, but they scattered. A bolt hissed at us, but missed. At the kiosk, a group of workers and several peering little brains leaped away in terror to let us pass. We gained the open air. With the small gravity rays darting down with repulsion upon the rocks, we mounted like rockets out of the cauldron. The upper plateau lay silent in the starlight, but the cauldron behind us was ringing with alarm, and again the danger siren was blaring. I changed my way of direction, swung it to the plateau rocks ahead. The arc of my flight was sharply bent as I went hurtling down. Over me I saw Snap use the same tactics. I tried to aim where we had left the girls and Molo. I could not see them down there amid the starlit crags, and then suddenly a wild apprehension filled me. How had we dared leave them to Molo's trickery? Then, ahead and below me, I saw the slight figure of one of the girls standing on a rock, with arms outstretched to signal us. I changed my ray to repulsion, barely in time to avoid crashing. The landing flung me in a heap. 20 feet away, Snap came whirling down. We picked ourselves up, saw Anita waving from the rock, and bounded to her. The girls were safe. Venza sat intent with unwavering, watchful gaze across the intervening space to where Molo had flattened himself against his rock, not daring to move. "Still got him," Venza exulted. "He wasn't willing to take any chances with us. You did it, Snap?" "I'm a motor oiler if we didn't. Come on, we got to get out of this. They're after us. We wrecked the whole damn place, Venza. Wandel's a normal planet now. No more of this accursed desolation of Earth." We learned later that our hope and our assumption that we had irretrievably wrecked the entire gravity system of Wandel was proven to be a fact. Wandel was, in effect, a normal celestial body now. The beams planted in Greater New York, Ferrok-Shahn, and Grebhar still streamed across space, but there was no giant beam from Wandel to seize them, and Wandel now could not move through space of her own volition. Like Earth and all other known planets, satellites, comets, and asteroids, she was subject now to all the normal, natural laws of celestial mechanics. We had done a thorough job of it. Now I shoved at Snap. "No time to talk. You tow the girls. I'll take Molo. Got to get to the Starstreak." I lunged over and seized Molo. "We did it. Now for your vessel. It will be ill for you if she is not where you say she is." "She will be there, Gregg Haljan." He docilely put himself in position for me to hook my forearm under his crossed, bound wrists and carry him. Snap rose up past us, towing the girls. Over the nearby cauldron a figure mounted to gaze and see the nature of the strange attacking enemy, and then sank back. With Molo hanging to me, I mounted with my ray, following Snap and the girls into the starlight. with the turmoil of the cauldron receding until in a moment or so it was gone behind our horizon. We headed now not toward war, whence we had come, but over at an angle to the side. Our great bounding arcs soon left the mountains behind. We crossed the river, another portion of the forest, and came over undulating lowlands. It was a flight of under half an hour. The pursuit, if indeed anyone followed us, remained below our little segment of curving horizon. Everywhere there was evidence of the storm. The forest trees were laid flat, strewn like driftwood over the area. The river had in several places lashed over its banks. The lowlands were dotted thick with globe dwellings. Some were hanging awry on their stems, others were pulled from their place, cracked, and piled into a litter. We kept well aloft. The surface scenes were only glimpses of wreckage, moving lights, and people, and there were areas which the wind had seemingly spared. The confusion from the storm was mingled now with the spreading alarm from the gravity station. The sound of the danger siren was still audible behind us. As we advanced into what now seemed the outskirts of the city like war, with a pile of solid-looking metal structures ranging the horizon ahead, I saw a distant spaceship rise up and wing away. Wandel was proceeding with the dispatching of her space navy to oppose the distantly gathering ships of Earth, Venus, and Mars. No doubt, with the wrecking of the control station, the masters of Wandel immediately recognized the paramount importance of the coming battle. The huge globular disc-like ship sailed over us, rotating with the impulse of its rocket streams. In a moment it was lost in the stars, and then another rose and followed it. There were many human figures in the air around us now. I mounted higher, and Snap with the girls followed me. The figures, intent upon their own affairs, did not seem to heed us. Molo's vessel lay alone upon a low metal cradle. No other ship was near it, but half a mile away on both sides we could see others resting on their stages. Lights were moving around and upon them, but the Starstreak was dark and neglected. We poised 1,000 feet over her, and to one side. I saw her as a long, low-pointed vessel, dead gray in color, longer than the Cometera, and seemingly narrower, but very similar in aspect.
"Mika and I are supposed to be gathering our crew," said Molo. "No one bothers with my vessel. Will you take me to war now to get Mika?"
"I will not." Snap was drifting down with the girls. They were near us. His arm waved at me with a gesture, and then came the muffled tone of his voice.
"Shall we drop down, Gregg?"
"Yes, but cautiously. Have your gun ready." Molo protested.
"I would like to take Mika with us, and a few of my crew. You will have trouble handling the Starstreak, just us 3 men."
"We'll take our chances." We dropped swiftly down upon the dark and vacant platform. The gray hull of the Starstreak loomed beside us, her dome arched still higher. An inclined catwalk went up to her open deck port. "I'll go first," I said softly to Snap. "Come quickly after me. Watch out, there might be someone on board." Venza still clung to her weapon. Mine was in my hand as I lifted Molo, and ignoring the incline, bounded the 30 feet for the deck port. I landed safely and stood Molo upon his feet. "Don't you move," I admonished him sternly. He stood docilely against the cabin wall of the superstructure. No one here. We had thought there might easily be 1 or 2 workers on board. Snap and the girls came sailing one after the other and landed on the deck beside me. We stood silent, alert. No one appeared from within the cabin, or from the lengths of the deck. Venza was watching Molo with her weapon upon him. Snap and I had planned this boarding, Anita and Venza to stay here and guard Molo, while we searched the ship and inspected the controls. We started for the cabin door oval.
"Gregg!"
It was all the warning Snap could give. I was within the dim cabin, but he, behind me, was still on the deck. I whirled to see a dozen dark forms leaping from the roof of the cabin superstructure. Snap was all but buried by them. These were not men of Wandel, but Molo's pirate crew, Martians, Earthmen, and Venusians. Snap's ray gun spat as he went down. One of the men dropped away. I saw Venza turn with startled horror as the huge figure of Mika leaped down upon her and Anita from the roof. For an instant, weapon in my hand, I paused in the doorway. I could not fire into the turmoil of that struggling group, so instead I plunged into it, striking with my fists. Molo was shouting, "Do not kill them! I was ordered not to kill them!" These men, so different from the insect-like workers and the brains of Wandel, were solid in my grip. But we were all so weightless. I felled one, but others gripped me, pounded me, a struggling mass of bodies, arms, and legs. We surged up to the superstructure roof and dropped upon it. My weapon was gone. Half a dozen adversaries had me pinioned. Down on the deck I saw that Venza had lost her weapon. Molo and Mika were clutching her. Snap was fighting with several antagonists. Anita was loose. She dove for the group in which Snap was struggling, hit them, kicked, and bounded upward, to be seized by two of my own captors. "Anita, don't fight! They'll kill you!" I tried to break loose, but 4 huge Martians were holding me. "Oh, Greg!" There was horror in Anita's voice. Snap had broken away. At the open deck port he stood, as though undecided what to do. The deck was almost black around him. He was silhouetted against the outside starlight. From almost at his side in the darkness a tiny bolt spat upward at his head. His arms went wildly out. He tumbled backward. At the top of the boarding incline his body seemed spasmodically to kick, and the thrust whirled it down into the darkness. The end of Snap! A pang went through me. Snap! My best friend! Molo cursed the unknown man of his crew who had fired the shot, but none would admit who did it. "Get to your posts!" Molo roared in Martian. "Enough of you are here! Lash up the prisoners! We're launching away now!" He thumped his brawny sister as she passed him. "Well played, Mika!" These wily Martians! Molo had planned that Mika was to gather the crew and wait here at the ship for him and Wick. If they returned with us as captives, it would be here that they would come. But if by chance things went adversely, Molo reasoned we would act just as we did, and Mika and her men were lurking here in ambush waiting for us. All of the many various ports swung shut. Anita, Venza, and I, with arms and legs bound, were taken by Molo to the forward observation and control room. The ship was resounding with signals. The interior controls in the hull base raised the gravity pull within the vessel to a strength comparable to that of Earth. Within a few minutes the Starstreak lifted from the stage. Strange, weird Wandel fell away from us. We slid upward through the atmosphere, following one of the globular Wandel vessels, and headed into space toward the point where, a few million miles distant, the ships of allied Earth, Venus, and Mars were gathering. End of Chapter 16. Read by Marty in Orchid, California. Chapter 17 of Wandel the Invader. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Marty in Orchid, California. Wandel the Invader by Ray Cummings. Chapter 17. "They are visible." Molo turned from the eyepiece of his electro-telescope. "Do you want to see them, Greg Haljan?" We were in the forward control and observation turret of the Starstreak. Molo and his sister Mika, Venza, Anita, and myself. Unobtrusively squatting on the floor was a small, gray, rat-faced fellow, put there, weapon in hand, to watch us. He was a ruffian from the underworld of Grebhar, a member of the Starstreak's pirate crew. We were some 10 hours out from Wandel. A group of 4 of the globular Wandel ships were with us, strung in a line some 10,000 miles to our left. We had been heading diagonally towards Mars. Some 15 other Wandel vessels were ahead, and others following. We were no more than 15 million miles from Mars when Molo sighted the Allied ships. "Will you observe them,
Greg Haljan?"
I moved to take his place at the scope grid, with the gaze of Anita and Venza upon me. They sat huddled together on a low bench against the back curve of the circular turret. It was dim here, with little spots of instrument lights, and the radiance coming in the glass sight plates of the encircling dome. The loss of Snap had put a grim look upon the girls. They were dispirited, docile, with Mika. They had hardly had a word with me. I think that all of us had about given up hope during those hours. Molo had consulted me several times with his policies of navigation, but I saw no chance to trick him. He was indeed far more experienced than I, and more skillful in celestial mechanics. I worked with him. I learned the operation and the handling of the Starstreak, which was not greatly different from the Cometara or the Planetara. Poor Snap! He and I had planned to capture and navigate this Starstreak. We could have handled her. There were, I gathered, some 15 men aboard her now, but no more than 2 or 3 were engaged at the navigating mechanisms. Even they could be dispensed with at times, for the ship's controls were all automatic, handled directly from the forward turret. I learned, too, something, though not much, of the Starstreak's weapons. They were similar to those of the Allied ships, since Molo, in equipping his pirate craft, had seized upon all the best he could find of the 3 worlds. The Starstreak, during this flight towards Mars, was in close communication with the Wandel craft. There was a giant vessel, the Weir, off to our left now. It carried the brain master in command of the Wandel forces. Molo took his orders from the Weir, but since his equipment and his weapons were wholly different, the Starstreak was set apart. "I can do what I like," Molo told me. "With my own judgment I can act. You shall see." "You've had plenty of experience, Molo." "Have I not? The terror of the star ways, your world called me." He chuckled vaingloriously. "I must justify it now." "Act, do not talk," Mika commented sourly. "Children with toys make speeches like that, and then the toys get broken. Fear not, sister. Never again will the Starstreak come to grief." And now I gazed through the scope at the waiting Allied ships. They were lying some 8 million miles off Mars. I gazed and saw the poised little group. There were perhaps 50 of them. The majority were Martian, long, low, and very sharp-ended, and dull red in color. The whiter Earth and Venus ships were silvery and drab. I could distinguish the several different types of craft in this hastily assembled fleet. Many converted commercials, like my ill-starred Cometara. A few rakish police ships, and about a dozen of the long, narrow, supermodern warships. It was their first voyage into battle. They had only been built these past few years, by peaceful governments that protested there never again would be another war. The little fleet was lying waiting for us. It was being augmented by occasional other ships from Mars. They saw us coming now. The radiance of a Benson curve light enveloped them, with a shaft toward us. The image of them shifted over 1,000,000 miles to one side. Molo laughed when he saw it. "Protecting themselves already. But we are not going to attack them there." The first tactics of the Wandel commander surprised me. We swung away from the course to Mars and headed diagonally toward Earth and Venus. Earth was the nearer to us, with Venus some 40 million miles beyond her. For hours we turned in that sweeping curve. Then, with our Wandel convoy following, we headed for Earth. I could not help admiring the way the Starstreak was handled. She turned more sharply than the Wandel craft, and before our next meal we were leading them all. Would the Allied ships follow us? It was immediately apparent they were coming, but from their poised position, hours of attaining velocity would be needed. The other Allied vessels approaching from Venus and Earth checked their flight and turned after us. We passed within 500,000 or 600,000 miles of several of them. I found now that some 20 other Wandel ships, leaving Wandel after us, had headed directly for Earth. We were all together. Presently, the Starstreak and nearly 50 Wandel ships gathered close to one side of the moon. The Allies, about 100 of them, were strung through space, scattered, with varying velocities and flight direction, but most of them endeavoring to get between the moon and Earth. This was the day. I call it that, a routine of meals which Mika grimly served us in the turret, and a little sleep when she took the girls below and I lay on the turret floor. I wondered who was in command of this Allied force, and did not learn until afterward that it was Grantline. The Cometera had fallen upon the moon Apennines, not very far from where my old Planetara still lay, near the base of the Archimedes, but Grantline and a few of his companions, with their powered suits, had struggled free from the gravity pull of the wreckage, and a few hours later a ship out from Earth picked them up. Grantline, on one of the Earth police ships, commanded the fleet now, and he afterward told me in detail how he endeavored to conduct his forces in the battle, thus enabling me to describe it from both viewpoints. He had been cruising towards Mars when he saw us make the turn. He thought a landing upon Earth might be planned, and hastened all his ships into the area between the moon and the Earth to cut us off. But that was what Wandel wanted. The Wandel ships, with the Starstreak among them, made a complete slow circuit of the moon. It took another day. Molo said very little to me in explanation of the Wandel tactics, but I could see that the object was to lure Grantline into the following. A few of the Allied ships did follow us around, but not many. The rest stayed carefully guarding the line between the moon and Earth. There had been no encounter yet between the hostile ships. The huge distances involved in the engagement must be kept in mind. The gravity rays from the Wandel ships were only a slight disturbing element at such a long distance. Grantline's Z-rays and Benson curve lights were defensive only. For offense, Grantline's electronic guns and other weapons were of varying range, but none for such distances as these. Wandel seemed unwilling to begin the battle, and Grantline was cautious as well. He did not know what weapons these strange globular vessels would use. His only experience had been our encounter with the whirling discs. Then, at the end of the second day, came the first clash. The Starstreak and all the Wandel ships were again clustered on the Earth's side of the moon. They were hovering perhaps 20,000 miles above its surface. Grantline's force was 100,000 miles off toward Earth. One of the Wandel ships came tentatively forward, and Grantline sent one of the new style warships to meet it. They encircled each other. Both were cautious, but there was a passing within 50 miles. The Earth ship fired her bolts. The insulated barrage of the Wandel ship withstood them. There was a shower of either sparks close to the ship and a reddening of the hull, but nothing more. It seemed that the electro barrages of the Wandel and the Allied ships were not very similar in nature. An aura of electromagnetism enclosing the ship like a curtain 50 feet away absorbed the electronic stream of the enemy bolt. The Wandel ship flung no bolts. She loosed a score of the whirling discs during the passing. They were of varying sizes, but similar to those which cut and wrecked the Cometera. In this instance, the Grantline ship was able to destroy each of them as it came close. This was the first encounter. The Earth warship went back to its squadron, and the Wandel vessel rejoined its fellows. It had fired no bolts. Grantline suspected now what afterward proved to be the fact. These Wandel vessels were not equipped with long-range electronic guns, and Wandel defensive tactics were necessary. They feared a widespread encounter. They were hovering in a compact group, covering a 500-mile area over the moon's surface. Their purpose was not yet apparent, but Grantline saw now that one of the Wandel ships was dropping down and landing on the moon. It skimmed the Apennines and landed not far from Archimedes. What was that for? Grantline noticed that the lowering, closely gathered Wandel fleet tried to mask the landing, and their gravity rays, with repulsive force, darted out to impede the Grantline vessels should they try to advance. This earthward hemisphere of the moon was now largely in shadow, but Grantline's Z-ray magnifiers showed the vessel on the moon. Apparatus was being unloaded. It seemed, down there on the rocky moon plain of the foothills of the Apennines, that some extensive, elaborate base was being prepared. It was for this the hovering Wandel fleet was waiting, holding off from conflict until this moon base was ready. When Grantline reached that conclusion, he ordered all his vessels forward to a general attack. End of Chapter 17. Read by Marty in Orchid, California. Chapter 18 of Wandel the Invader. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Marty in Orchid, California. Wandel the Invader by Ray Cummings. Chapter 18. During this time on the Starstreak, as we and the Wandel fleet made the preliminary circuit of the moon, an incident occurred which changed everything for me. I had noticed several times, as we had gathered in the Starstreak's forward turret, that Venza and Anita were eyeing me. Their expressions were furtive, but I realized that they were trying to attract my attention. We had no opportunity to speak secretly. Molo or Mika, or that rat-faced guard, were always too near us, and Molo kept me busy with computations of our course. We rounded the moon. We gathered with the Wandel fleet some 20,000 miles above the lunar surface, and I watched that ship descend and land. Like Grantline, I wondered what for. Molo gave me a hint. I saw through his scope bloated figures in pressure suits unloading mechanisms. They seemed to be placing huge contact discs in a circle on the lunar rocks. It was reminiscent of the Wandel gravity station and the contact beam which Molo had planted in Great New York. Then at last the girls had an opportunity to whisper to me. A swift phrase came from Anita. "Greg, Snap is alive, hiding on board." I gasped. "Snap alive?" "Planning to rescue us. You and he can capture the Starstreak." "Anita, tell me how." "No more now. Our room below. He's near it. He spoke to us." No more. She moved away from me. But it was enough. Snap alive. I recalled that when he fell beside the ship, no one had bothered to go down after the body, and at that time the hull ports were open. After a time Mika took the girls below. I sat with Molo, gazing down at the dark and gloomy surface of the moon. I had finished the mathematical work Molo had given me. My thoughts were with Anita and Venza down in their cabin, now with Mika. Perhaps, even now, Snap was joining them. I hardly heard Molo's low, muttered curses as he set his lenses for a slight alteration of our slow, circular course among the Wandel fleet. "That fellow at my gravity shifts acts like a nitwit. He has them disarranged." It snapped me to sudden alertness. "Something wrong, Molo?" "Nonsense." "These men of my crew answer my controls too slowly. They should jump when my signals come." The plate suddenly shifted normally, but there had been an interval of delay. Molo was puzzled and annoyed. My heart pounded as I wondered if he would investigate, but he did not. "You had better sleep, Haljan. Take advantage now. We shall have action presently. Did you figure our emerging curve?" I shoved my computations across the table to him. "There.
You are quick, Haljan.
We should emerge from the moon's shadow in about 2 hours.
But I will not hold that course. We're staying close, near here with the other vessels, but I want some velocity anyways. Take your sleep, Haljan.
I stretched on the narrow floor mattress. The turret was silent. I was aroused from a doze by Molo's activities in the turret. The girls and Mika were still below. The ever-silent Venusian squatting in the turret corner still had his gun upon me. I saw that Grantline's ships over a wide fanned spread were advancing, and presently we were engaged in the soundless turmoil of battle. I cannot relate more than fragments, things I saw and experienced, during 6 or more hours of bursting electronic light and puffs of darkness in that spread of battle area within the moon shadow. It was a silent battle of crossing lights, ships 1,000 miles apart, gathering velocity with great tangential curves, passing each other in a second, sweeping 1,000 miles apart again, turning and coming back. 100 engagements. The Starstreak was very fast, very mobile, and unlike all the other Wandel ships, had the Allies' own weapons to use against them. I saw now why they called Molo the terror of the starways. We swept into the shadowed battle area. Over all its 1,000-mile spread were the radiant Wandel gravity beams, disturbing and impeding the course of Grantline's ships. There was the luminous gleam of projectile rockets, like little comets, soundless, launched by the Wandel craft, and the radiance of the rocket streams, which all the vessels were using now for close maneuvering, the glare of Grantline's searchlight bombs and his white search beams to disclose the deadly whirling discs, which the weapons of his vessel must seek out and destroy. A chaos of silent light, stabbed here and there with Grantline's darkness bombs, bombs of limited local range which exploded in space, and which, for a few minutes' duration, absorbed all light rays, giving a temporary effect of darkness. And then wreckage, broken, leprous Wandel vessels whose barrage at close range had been smashed by Grantline's guns, torn and littered Allied ships, struck by the huge exploding comet projectiles and the whirling discs, airless hulks and scattered fragments which no longer resembled a ship at all, but only a hull plate or a torn segment of dome, and little drifting blobs, the survivors in pressure suits who had leaped from the wreckage, little blobs ignored, whirled away, or drawn forward as by chance the sweeping gravity beams fell upon them, tiny derelicts, floating, storm-tossed until the moon's attraction caught and pulled them down, or a whirling disc cut through them, or the distant aura of a bolt shocked them to a merciful death. It was a 3-dimensional, 1,000-mile spread of fantasy inferno. Out of it, after an hour or two, a steady sift of every manner of wreckage was drifting down upon the moon. The scene began to blur, a haze like glowing stardust, or the radiance from a comet's tail was spreading a weirdly luminous mist, blurring, obscuring the scene. This was the released electrons and the dissipating gases of the space guns and exploding projectiles, forming dust which glowed in the mingled starlight and earthlight. The Starstreak had plunged during those 6 or 8 hours through the battle area. Our several encounters were all characterized by the Starstreak's extreme flexibility, her speed, mobility, and Molo's reckless skill. We came through unscathed. There is a certain advantage for the man who seems not to care for his own life. But there was an encounter, the last one as it chanced, just before we emerged downward out of the fog and found ourselves no more than 1,000 miles above the moon's surface, where our adversary was equally reckless, and only Molo's skill saved us. We came upon a Venus police ship. We plunged as though seeking a collision, and the Venus ship was willing. For a moment of chaos, both barrages, held against the exchange of bolts. Then we rolled over and tilted down from the impulse of the stern rockets. The passing must have been within feet, not miles. And in that second, Molo timed a shot to strike at the enemy bottom. It went through their barrage. Behind us, a second later, there was only strewn wreckage of the ship, so finely powdered that it became a silvery radiance like moonlight shining on a little patch of fog.
Not too bad.
Molo gazed around for appreciation.
Not bad, Gregg Haljan. Molo is not too unskillful.
We hung now close above the moon's surface, with the battle area over us. Out of the fog up there came the drifting wreckage, and now the Wandel ships were coming down one by one. Not so many of them now. No more than 10 of them emerged. Grantline did not follow. His ships withdrew the other way. The fog gradually dispersed. Grantline could now take stock of the battle. He had been victorious. One might call it that, since his percentage of strength numerically was greater now than when the battle began. 10 remaining Wandel ships and the Allies had about 25. Another hour passed. Grantline's 25 ships were gathered in a close group, 10,000 miles above the moon's surface. Under them, the 10 Wandel vessels and the Starstreak seemed ranging in a 500-mile circle. Down through it, on the rocks of the moon and the foothills of the Apennines, the mechanism established there abruptly sprang into action. It was a giant gravity beam, of infinitely greater power than any Wandel vessel could generate. It flung out its spreading conical ray. So this had been the purpose of all the Wandel tactics, to manipulate Grantline into his present position. This gravity beam, though far smaller, was comparable to the one used by the Wandel control station. A rock contact against a huge mass, Wandel, and here, the moon, were necessary to give the ray its power. No ship could generate such a ray, so the Wandelites chose this battleground where they could establish themselves upon our deserted moon. The beam had about 100-foot diameter at its base on the rocks. It passed upward through the circle of Wandel vessels, and its spread bathed all of Grantline's ships at once. An attractive beam so powerful that the ships were helpless. Against all their efforts, they were pinned and drawn downward. A slight velocity at first, but with tremendous acceleration. Within an hour they were hurtling, coming together as they speeded down the narrowing cone of the beam. The 10,000 miles, their distance above the moon, was cut to 5,000. The Wandel ships drew aside, keeping well out of range to let them pass. In another 30 minutes they would crash against the rocks. I gazed in horror from the Starstreak's turret. We were sideways to the angle of the beam. Grantline's ships were pulled together now in almost a 50-mile group. They hung all askew, helplessly pinned, some broadside, some upended. The movement of their fall was so rapid that even with the naked eye it was apparent.
Got them now, Molo chuckled. This is the end for them, Gregg Haljan.
There were only 3 of us in the turret, Molo and I and my watchful silent guard, who sat cross-legged, with a ray gun pointed at me. Mika and the 2 girls were below during all the engagement. It was over now. During this lull, Molo had sent the men from the deck gun ports to their hull quarters. Our decks were empty now. The bridges and catwalks up here had momentarily no occupants. The Starstreak had little velocity, only a slow drift downward toward the moon's surface, which was now only a few hundred miles beneath us. The lunar disk was a great, dark spread of desolation, with only the sunlight topping the distant horizon limb. And from under us to the side was the source of the giant gravity beam. Over us were the watch Wandel vessels, and still higher, the helpless knot of Grantline's ships hurtling down.
Got them now, Mola repeated. In another...
He never finished. From the open doorway of the turret a figure rose up. Snap! His aspect, even more than his appearance, transfixed me. Snap, with his clothes torn, grimy and spattered with blood, his face pale and gaunt, with hollow blazing eyes, and above it the shock of rumpled red hair. In one hand he clutched a ray gun, and in the other a blood-stained knife. My guard squatted on the floor, half turned. Snap's bolt met him before he could raise his weapon. He tumbled dead almost at my feet, and mingled with the hiss of the bolt was Snap's shout at the unarmed Molo. "Into the corner, you! Back up, you damned traitor, else I'll kill you as I've killed everyone else on this ship." End of chapter 18. Read by Marty in Orchid, California.
Chapter 19 of Wandel the Invader. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jennifer Fournier, Centerville, Virginia, USA. Wandel the Invader by Ray Cummings. Chapter 19. I had leaped and seized the gun, which was still in the hand of the dead guard. "Snap! The girls!" "Down below. Free. They've got Mecca bound and gagged, locked and sealed in a bunk room. You bring them up. I'll hold this accursed traitor. No need to kill him. By the gods, I've killed enough." He saw for the first time the vast, silent drama in the firmament outside the dome windows. "Greg, for the love of... No time now, Snap. I'll get the girls. Watch out. I might have missed somebody down below." He had. 3 men appeared on the forward deck near the foot of our turret ladder. My bolt spat down upon them. 2 of them fell. The other ran aft, toward where I saw Venza and Anita appearing from the lounge doorway of the cabin superstructure. I fired again, and the running man tumbled forward on his face. He was the last of the pirate crew. Molo was crouching, half bending forward over his instrument table, with Snap's gun upon him. The girls burst upon us. We armed them. Mecca was safely fastened down below. We backed Molo to the floor in the corner, with Venza and Anita watching him. Snap and I were in control of the ship. For temporary periods, the automatics would handle the gravity shifters. I could operate them here from the turret. We had a downward velocity toward the moon. 500 miles below us, no more, was the base of that diabolical gravity ray which was so swiftly pulling the 25 Grantline ships to their destruction. I gripped Snap and told him what we must do. The forward gun on the starboard side is almost identical with our Earth guns, the Francine projectors. With a short range you can handle it, and I'll give you a close mark. He dashed for the deck. I set the levers. Gravity plates with full bow attraction. Stern repulsion to the Earth, and the stern rocket streams at highest power. The Starstreak responded smoothly, with acceleration such as only Molo's famous terror of the starways could attain. We dove for the moon. Breathless minutes. Those Wandel ships up in the firmament behind our stern would probably do nothing. They would not understand this sudden move of their friendly ship. The brain masters, the insect-like wand lights down on the moon rocks operating the mechanism of the gravity ray, would not suspect until too late what the Starstreak was doing. Uprushing rocks, the Apennines to one side, the dark yawning maw of Archimedes on the other. We were diving parallel with the gravity ray now, hardly a mile from it, diving for the mechanisms of its source. 20,000 feet of altitude. I bent our rocket streams up for the start of our turning. Bow hull gravity plates next. 10,000 feet. 5,000. How close we went I never knew. It was seconds now, not minutes. I shifted all the controls. Our bow lifted as we straightened. The whole spreading lunar surface tilted and dipped. Snap fired. I saw the bolt flash at the tilting landscape and a puff of light down there on the rocks. and an instant later there were vacant rocks where the little cluster of men and mechanisms had been, and the upflung gravity beam was gone. The giant towering cliffs of the mountain of Archimedes seemed to rush at our upturning bow. The great dark crater mouth slid under our hull, but we cleared it. The maw of blackness slid down and away. The whole lunar world tilted down and dwindled as we mounted again into the starlight. Minutes passed while we mounted. Above our upstanding bow was a new drama. The suddenly released Grantline ships, almost level with the 10 Wandel vessels when the ray vanished, turned sideways. The poised Wandel craft, devoid of velocity, could not pick up the ray to escape now. Grantline, for those minutes, ignored the frantically flung discs. It was a desperate encounter, all at close quarters. We saw the spitting, puffing lights and the silent turmoil, hidden presently by the spreading clouds of luminous fog. Then out of it came drifting the wreckage. We plunged through an end of the glowing fog, encountered nothing but 2 triumphant Venus vessels. With them, we mounted into the upper starlight. This was the end of the battle. The victorious Grantline ships, one by one, came lunging up. Only 12 of them now. No Wandel vessels were left. The great spreading cloud drifted down like a shroud to hide the wreckage, drifted and settled to the lunar surface, a great radiant area of fog gleaming in the earthlight. End of chapter 19.
Chapter 20 of Wandel the Invader. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This is a recording by Segan Bretsky. There is very little more pertinent to this narrative that I need add of the events on Earth, Venus, and Mars during this momentous summer. The main facts are history now. The wild storms, the damage done by outraged nature and panic among the people, all of it has been detailed as public news. The strange light beams planted by Wandel in Greater New York, Grebar, and Farakshan have not yet burned themselves away, but they are lessening and scientists say they will soon be gone. The changed calendars call this the New Era. The axis of each of the 3 worlds was not appreciably altered. The climates are at last restoring to normal. But the axial rotations of all 3 planets were slowed by that attacking Wandel beam before we wrecked the gravity station. The Earth day has been lengthened, resulting in the new calendar, the New Era. Our year, formerly of approximately 365 1/4 days, now contains but 358.7 days. Molo and Mika have returned to Farakshan. They were tried there for piracy and treason and are imprisoned. And Wandel? With her gravity controls wrecked, Wandel became subject to the balancing celestial forces. During those succeeding months of the summer and autumn, no other spaceship appeared from her, nor did our world investigate. Her presence here, even a little world 1/6 the size of the moon, was causing disturbance enough. Wandel moved with slow velocity, like a dallying, strangely sluggish comet about to round our sun. What would her final orbit be? By fortunate chance, she headed in, far from Earth and Venus, missed Mercury by a wide margin, went close around the sun, came out again. But the pull of the sun and Mercury dragged her back. Her velocity was not great enough. I recall that late autumn afternoon when, with Anita, Snap, and Venza, I sat in the observatory near Washington, gazing at Wandel through the dark glass of the solar scope. Doomed invader! She showed now as a tiny dark dot over the sun's giant, blazing surface. This was her final plunge. The dot was presently swallowed and gone. It seemed, among those giant, licking streamers of blazing gas, that there was an extra puff of light. And some claim now that for a brief time our sunlight was a trifle warmer, a little higher, to mark the end of Wandel the Invader. End of Chapter 20. End of Wandel the Invader by Ray Cummings. This is a LibriVox recording, recorded by Segan Bretsky. Thank you for listening.